Well, this is Dr. Stan here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at, that illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality and not illusion or delusion that will determine what the future will bring. And I need to remind you the views expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you listen to. They happen to be my views, and, of course, for the next hour, they're going to be the views of our good friend Dr. Russell Blaylock, who, as a retired neurosurgeon, writes extensively on health issues, and we carry a number of his books, Health and Nutrition Secrets That Can Save Your Life, and his book on excitotoxins, The Taste That Kills, and his book on natural strategies for cancer patients, and they're all important books. He writes a monthly newsletter, Health on Health. But this evening, well, we're not going to be talking about that necessarily this evening. Russell, thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Stan.
Now, what were we going to talk about tonight?
Well, I thought I would cover some topics that have to do with the rapidly appearing destruction of our country. I think that what we're seeing, those of us that are older who've watched this occur and studied it as it came along, you know, you can live through a historical period and not see things. I'm different than my wife. My wife doesn't like to look at other people. I like to watch people. So I see things she doesn't see. Same thing with being observant as you're growing up, when you're in high school, college, medical school, or whatever your profession. If you're paying attention to the transitions that are occurring, if you're reading deeply, studying, wanting to know, your view of what occurred over your lifetime is radically different than someone who spends their time in entertainment, pursuing a profession, and rather ignoring the political events and the cultural events that are changing around them. So our view is a little different, and what you and I and others our age have seen as a radical transformation of America, particularly in the last 20 years. The changes that have occurred, particularly in the last 4 years to 8 years, is so dramatic, it's unbelievable, but not really unexpected to those of us that have read about these things, because we saw it coming. We studied revolution, we studied history, we followed what these people were saying in their writing. And as I tell people, you know, in Germany, Hitler wrote about what he planned to do in his Mein Kampf. People read it, and some of them, and said, well, you know, he doesn't really intend that. Others didn't read it at all. That's the majority of people. And so they were quite surprised when what he promised them and what he told them was quite different.
President Obama told us that if he was elected, he was going to change America. And I think most people thought that was going to be a change for the better. Well, he has changed America, but not a change for the better. Go right ahead.
Yeah, what's interesting is his wording. He says, I'm going to fundamentally change America. Now, that went over a lot of people's heads, but those of us that observe, we knew what that meant when you say a fundamental change. It means erase everything that had existed before, which is what happened in the French Revolution. And in revolutionary history, what we find out is that there's a phase of anarchy. The purpose of the anarchy is to destroy everything that existed prior to the revolution. It's a cleansing. And then after the cleansing, then they introduce their program afresh. And you remember that in the French Revolution, the calendar started with the day of the revolution's solidification. And that's what we're seeing in this society, is we're entering a period of anarchy and dissolution, and attack of every aspect of the American culture.
Well, you hold that thought. We'll be back in just a moment. Our guest, Dr. Russell Blaylock. Russell, you go right ahead.
So what we're in this phase now that if you study the French Revolution, and there's a tremendous book by Gustave Le Bon on the psychology of the French Revolution, and he goes through this meticulously, showing how you could lead people to precipitate such a destructive, inhumane period that lasted over 10 years and killed maybe 1 million people, and eventually led to the Russian Revolution and to the Chinese Communist Revolution and the spread of Marxism-Leninism throughout the world. But when you look at what happened to people is they believed illusions. And this is what the utopians did. In people's mind, they paint illusions of a beautiful, peaceful society where everyone's happy, where there's justice, fraternity, liberty. They emphasize the equality in particular. Everyone would be the same. Everyone would share things. Everyone would work tirelessly for this utopian future. Now, the way the socialists and the revolutionaries control the people is they tell them, only look at the illusion, only look at the thing that I'm painting in your mind with these words. Never look at reality. And when you look at this previous presidency, what you see is that, in fact, that's exactly what he did. He said, this is going to be the most open government that we've ever had. Well, it's the most closed, secretive government we've had. He said, I'm going to bring the nation together and destroy this divisiveness and bring the races together, bring all classes together so there will be no more contention as we've had in previous administrations. Well, this is the most divisive, contentious, hate-filled, balkanized we've ever been in our history. He said he's going to end the war. That is, within the first few days, first week of his administration, he would bring the troops home from Afghanistan and Iraq and stop the wars that have been going on by the previous administration. Close the torture centers in Cuba. So what did he do? He did exactly the opposite. The wars have been stepped up. They're continuing, and now they're expanded enormously. He's bought billions of dollars of high-tech weapons for the Muslim Brotherhood.
Hold the thought here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Russell is simply just talking about the inconsistencies of what President Obama promised. He promised, of course, to immediately end the wars and bring our troops home. We didn't do that. He promised certainly to be a transparent administration so people would know what was going on. There'd be no more secrets, and yet this has been the most secretive of all, certainly, administrations. He was going to bring the people together so we would simply stop squabbling and we could work together to make a better future. And, of course, we have divided the country, divided it very, very strongly. So you say one thing, you do exactly the opposite. And most people really don't remember what was said before. They know something's wrong, but they do not understand. We are certainly mired in contradictions. Go right ahead, Russell.
Well, and the importance of understanding the French Revolution, because virtually every revolution since then has been patterned after this revolution. It set the psychology of revolution, and it taught the revolutionaries, the people who were directing it from their secret chambers, because you have to realize that the French Revolution started with the middle class and the peasants, and the things that they were asking for were rather reasonable. The nobility had no real function in the country, but it was dominant, and it was abusing the people and consuming enormous amounts of wealth. And the middle class said, that's not fair, it's not just, we should have more say-so, we should have more of a parliamentary democratic type government. Well, most people agreed with that. But very quickly, what the Jacobins did, who were the secret leaders of the revolution, the very extreme radicals, what they did is they radicalized the revolution quickly. And they bought the violence. And guess who ended up the victim Well, the victims were the peasants. The victim was the middle class, who they killed by the hundreds of thousands. And, of course, it was the religious people, because they saw religion as their enemy. They were basically satanic. Many were atheists. And so that they led a revolution against religion and killed tens of thousands of priests and nuns. They killed children in these horrible acts that were just beyond belief. So what happens to revolutions is they promise something by painting an illusion. And it's a very alluring illusion. And the people are won over. What they have in their mind is quite different from what the nefarious group that's working in the shadow to bring it all about really intend. And as I listened to people that were being interviewed during the election in the previous 4 years and this recent election, it was amazing listening to them. Oh, he's going to pay my rent. Hey, I'm going to get a free cell phone. Oh, I'm getting Obama money. Oh, I'm going to get free health care. They all were looking at this illusion, this mural that is being painted by the revolutionaries. And they saw only good. It was only going to be wonderful and utopian and happiness and peace. But actually, behind that facade, what the reality was, that he was building slowly a tyrannical government, a government that was destroying the Constitution and the Bill of Rights very rapidly. He had the Defense Authorization Act, which gave the president something that no president has ever had, which says that he can arrest anyone without ever filing charges. They can disappear. They can't have an attorney to defend them. They would be tried in a military court, and they can disappear. And he said if he can make an assassination list, even of an American, and have them assassinated without any explanation, purely at his discretion. Now, this was an incredible bill for our representatives to have signed. And they signed it because he told them, oh, this will never be used against Americans. You can trust me. And so they trusted him. They believed the painting they saw on the mural. And instead, now that he has it, he can do whatever he wants to any citizen, any group, anybody who resists his power.
But not only he could, but he has. He had a 16-year-old boy, the son of a man who was never accused of, never convicted of being a terrorist, never indicted as a terrorist. But he was assassinated, and then several weeks later they killed his 16-year-old son, who was having a barbecue in Yemen with a friend, and they killed him. They sent a drone in. They killed him. They killed him intentionally. He was an American citizen. So it's not only that they have the authority, they have certainly the right. They have done it. But what disturbs me most, Russell, is there's no outcry. No outcry from the American people. But even more frightening is there's no outcry from the American churches and our religious leaders about not only torture, but about the murder of a 16-year-old boy whose father was accused of being a terrorist. Accused, never convicted, never indicted, just accused. Go right ahead.
Well, and there's a very good reason why that happened, and that is what the revolutionaries learned in their psychology. And that is that you first have to establish an enemy that is so terrifying, an outside enemy, a force that's endangering everyone, and that your only protection is the government. You have to be convinced that this enemy is going to get you and destroy your family and your way of life if the government is not there with its powerful arm. Now, this is the threat from the Islamic terrorists. This is what's terrified people. Now, many years ago, there was a report that was leaked by U.S. News and World Report called the Report from Iron Mountain. In this report, if you read it, this is exactly what it says. In order to bring the world together for the purpose of this movement, we need to have either a war of massive proportions or some perceived outside enemy that's going to draw all the people to the government for its protection. Well, that's the Homeland Security, the Patriot Act, the TSA. And so people don't want to resist because they say, well, if the government is doing that, it's to protect us. They need 30,000 drones flying over America looking at your property to make sure that evil terrorists that none of us can quite see but the government is hiding out there ready to pounce at any moment. We need to be checked. We need to have our emails checked and listen to our conversations. We need to have our houses broken into without the protection of the Constitution. Our protections where you had to show what you were looking for when you went in the house is no longer valid. They can look for anything they want to. They can tear the walls out. They can tear the floors up and then leave your house totally destroyed and never have a court order saying exactly what they're looking for. So we're seeing unprecedented advances. We've seen more executive orders by this president than any other president and all the presidents put together. He's just churning out executive orders, which bypasses Congress. And Congress sits quietly, does not protest, does not demand that the Constitution be followed in declaring war. They allow this executive to declare war. They allow our ambassador to be murdered, our Navy SEALs to be murdered, and there's no answerability. We allow the NSA to collect trillions of conversations. I listened to an interview with a whistleblower from the NSA, and he said they've collected something like 6 trillion messages. And he said they've collected so many from every American, every congressman, every person, that they're having trouble with storing it. So they're building a $2 billion storage facility in Nevada by the NSA to store all of these conversations. And he said, what we do, they're not going to look through all of them. He said, they wait until they target you. When you're targeted, your dossier is pulled up, all your emails, all your letters, all your conversations on telephones or any other form of communication is meticulously picked through, looking for some evidence that they can use to convict you of some crime, which could be some obscure law. There's so many laws, everyone is guilty of something. And he said that's the way they target you. Well, we remember under Bill Clinton, this very thing happened. He sicked the IRS on virtually every conservative publication, every conservative book publisher, every conservative newspaper in the country, selectively. There was very little outcry over this use of the federal government against his political enemy. That was just setting the precedent. Now we see that not only can they stick the IRS on you, but if they want to, they can make you disappear or have you assassinated. Now, some people think, well, that's kind of over the top, and I don't think that'll happen. Well, when you look into the history of National Socialist Germany under Hitler, and you look at Lenin's first few years of power, people were saying the same thing. Well, I know we've given him that power, but I don't really think he'll use it against the people. He says there's an external enemy. He says that he has to protect us against in the case of Hitler, the communists, because they burned the Reichstag. And in Russia, Lenin was telling them there's enemies that wants to stop this utopian revolution. They're enemies of the people. So I have to protect you against them. And people believed it until it was too late. And that's the thing. And like Niall Ferguson said, America's going to fall. But the thing is, it's going to fall very rapidly. And Niall Ferguson is a brilliant historian of civilization and of international finance. So I would take his word for it.
And of course, our job is to try to make the American people understand what's going on. The fact that we have a Constitution, it is the foundation of our system of government. It is the law of the land. It is being violated by the subversive element that are working at the leadership of both political parties, and fortunately are working within our conservative organizations and our religious organizations to neutralize them. We'll be back in a moment with Dr. Russell Blaylock. Go right ahead, Russell.
Well, one of the things that you touched on there at the end was the subversion of the conservatives. We have what we call the paleo-conservatives, and that's like the founding fathers and Russell Kirk and Richard Weaver, people who believed in the same principles and philosophical beliefs that form the structure of this country. That's been replaced over the last 20 to 30 years by a very nefarious group calling themselves neoconservatives. Now, when you look at the leading neoconservatives, in fact, they were previous Trotskyites, followers of Leon Trotsky. And they believed that, in fact, there should be a system of central control by elites, that society should be regimented and controlled, and that it's going to require some degree of oppression to control people and regulate them. So they're very close to the collectivist ideas of the Marxist-Leninists and of the National Socialists. These are similar viewpoints of an elitist control, which we call Gnosticism. Now, because these Trotskyites, these neoconservatives, have taken over, their view is that we're going to, by use of the American military, democratize the world, and then to bring the world under unified central control. In other words, a new world order. And of course, this has been a dream since at least the 1700s. Is when this began to be solidified. This dream of creating a one-world system in which we dissolve the sovereignty of nations and bring nations under control of elites. These elites have written about this since this time. I mean, we have a long history of philosophical writing about this coming New World Order. Well, the announcement is it's arrived, and they're no longer hiding it. You and I, Stan, will remember 30, 40 years ago, you couldn't get a commentator on the television or the radio to admit that he was a liberal. If he was called a liberal, he denied it. Then suddenly, we started seeing they proudly announced they were liberals. And then they even called themselves as being from the left. So now we have people that are on our major media openly admitting that they're to the left, even the far left, and that they embrace Marxist ideas openly. For instance, the Communist Manifesto, if you look at the 10 principles of the Communist Manifesto, virtually every one of them has been implemented by these very same people. And so when Ronald Reagan said that the progressive income tax was a Marxist idea, and Ted Kennedy died laughing, a big guffaw at how stupid Ronald Reagan was. Well, you look at, I think, number 2 on the list was the steeply graded income tax. And then the next one after that was an inheritance tax. To take property away from people. Now, this is the centerpiece of the Obama administration.
Hold that thought, Russell. We'll be back here in just a moment, right here at Radio Liberty. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly Russell is talking about the fact that here in America, certainly the leadership of the Republican Party, many of them are people who call themselves neoconservatives, and basically they're not really conservatives. They're certainly Trotskyites who believe we need a ruling elite to control the masses. This is the Republican Party, ladies and gentlemen, which has turned its back on its traditions of limiting the power of government so men could be free, now embracing the concept we need an all-powerful government because people can't look after themselves, and certainly there's very little difference between the big spending policies of the Republicans and the big spending programs of the Democrats. They're both working in the same direction. And Russell is simply pointing out that much of what we believe about what is going on in America just isn't true. There are people in positions of leadership who have an entirely different perspective and do not believe in this concept of limited power and individual liberty. They want a ruling elite who tells people what to do because they're too dumb to know what is good for them. That's why they need certainly a non-elected oligarchy controlling the destiny of our nation. Russell, go right ahead.
Yeah, I just quickly had jotted down some things that I thought were really key events that you're going to see grow substantially in the next several years. One is to force moving people into the cities and out of the suburbs, closing suburbs. I saw that proposed by one of the congressmen, that we need to start moving people out of suburbs into the city. Well, that's always been a program by the revolutionaries, because it's much easier to control people if you have them all in one location. So that's a key point. Other is expansion of occultism. I've been an observer of this occultic movement for some time, as you have, Stan. And, there's a very strong philosophical link between occultism and the revolutionary philosophy. They're inseparable. All revolutions that we've seen in modern times are occultic. The book Fire in the Minds of Men by Billington, he goes through the history quite meticulously of this occultic link. Well, what you're saying, and this is an observation of historians, is that when religion begins to be attacked and is removed from the public square, we don't have secularism appear so much as we have an rapid expansion of interest in occultism. And I've noticed over the last 20 years, 30 years, this incredible expansion of occultism. When I used to go to the bookstores, the occult books took up not even half a shelf. Now there are 2 or 3 long shelves that are just filled with books on the occult subject. Books such as How to Be a Teenage Witch, How to Read Minds, Levitation, Ghosts, all of these things are interesting, trying to interest our youth and our people in another form of mysticism, which is intimately linked to the revolutionary mentality. So you're going to see a lot more interest in the occult. They're going to start legitimizing things like UFOs and ghosts and ghost hunting and mysticism of all kinds. Anything that takes you away from Christianity, our traditional religious beliefs. We're going to see further balkanization of America. They have people hating the wealthy. The enemy is the wealthy. We need to steal their wealth. They openly are advocating the stealing of the wealth of the successful, of the creators of jobs. Like Peter Schiff said, under this proposal of this president, he will take 50% of Peter Schiff's income. And he said, do you think that's fair? That's government stealing from me. He works hard for that money. He's very intelligent. He's done some incredible things. And the government has no hand in it, but just comes and steals 50% of his profits. We're going to see a furthering of attack on the founding fathers. They're going to be vilified. And the children are going to start hearing all of the terrible things about the founding fathers and the principles that they represented. That occurred in the 1920s to some degree, particularly with the historian Charles Beard. But we're going to see a resurgence of that to an incredible degree. Each founding father is going to be vilified, including George Washington. Just as we saw Christopher Columbus vilified 10 or 20 years ago. That was their first open attempt on attack.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Okay, Russell, and I think you're absolutely right. If they want to destroy our belief in America, they have to destroy our belief in the founders of this country, and they're doing a very, very good job to undermine our belief in all of the men, the founding fathers, the people who gave us this amazing, amazing country we've had the privilege of living in. Go right ahead.
Well, and the next thing we're going to see is the solidification of control over the education of our children. You know, this has been going on for some time. One of the great advances freedom made was the homeschooling movement, which, much to the surprise of these leftist manipulators, it was highly successful. These children are some of the most intelligent children in our society. They're socially some of the most best adjusted. So the NEA repeatedly at its conventions calls for the destruction of the homeschooling movement or the absolute control of it. So they set the curriculum that they should determine what textbooks they use and what's taught in the home. Children are going to be in school for longer periods of time during the year. You know, every community there's always a call that they should have to go to school throughout the year. This is so that they spend less time with their parents, so that the parents cannot contaminate their learning. And, of course, they'll be entering school at an earlier time. You know, in many of the communist systems, they take them as soon as they're little toddlers, so that they can never come under the influence of their parents. And, of course, the civilian draft into training schools, like the Hitler Youth and the Young Communist League. Bill Clinton did that in Arkansas, where he had training schools for young people. And people that attended these schools talked about the extreme radical curricula that was being taught. Next thing we're going to see is an enormous expansion of interlocking corporations, international corporations, and further merger of corporations with government. What we're seeing is a blatant corporatism occurring now. And if you look at corporations, you're amazed when you look at this corporation and all these other corporations that you think are independent. You find out one central corporation actually owns them all. They can own hundreds, if not thousands, of corporations.
Hold that thought, and we'll be back in just a moment here with Dr. Russell Blaylock. Well, Dr. Blaylock, simply talking about how our society is changing, how many of our corporations are working hand in glove with government to create sort of a corporate governmental structure. And certainly many of our corporations are certainly losing their identity. They're being absorbed by other corporations. And we're seeing certainly the centralization of economic power in fewer and fewer hands. Step by step, we increase the power of the federal government, and we increase the power of the corporate situation. We're seeing a move towards a corporate state. This is exactly what happened in Benito Mussolini's Italy. This is exactly what happened in Hitler's Germany, where the corporations and the government worked hand in hand for the same common cause, both strengthening one another. Go right ahead, Russell.
Yeah, there's a great book by James Gilbert called Designing the Industrial State, The Intellectual Pursuit of Collectivism in America, 1880 to 1940. And he goes through the history of collectivism in America, showing that what really intrigued the collectivist elite was the corporation. And in the 1920s onward, we saw a tremendous growth in America of corporations and the reach of these corporations internationally. And what they liked about the corporation, it was the perfect collectivist enterprise. It was based on rigid regimentation of its workers, careful control of its workers. It was based on central planning, controlled by an elite board that made all the decisions for the corporation. And it was heavily bureaucratized. The government was not that well organized. So the collectivists of the world said, really the pattern we should be following is the corporation. Well, if you look at people like J.P. Morgan, who people think, well, this is the icon of capitalism. J.P. Morgan was enamored with Karl Marx and the socialist system. And he worked tirelessly to destroy competition in the United States. He thought competition was a terrible thing. So did Rockefeller. And they worked together to bring about this corporate government structure that eventually would create world corporatism, in which the corporation eventually would take over the government and would be the government of the world. And because of its enormous efficiency, far beyond government, it would be able to control, manipulate, and make the world much more efficient and fair and just. So I think we're going to see the corporation grow at a rate that we've never seen before, and the smaller corporations will disappear or be merged into the larger corporations. The King Gillette, who was the inventor of the Gillette razor, in the 1890, he had this idea, and he wrote a book about it. And he said we should produce a single corporation called the United Corporation and bring all the corporations under it, and it will rule the world. And he pursued this throughout his life, this idea of this utopian corporate structure. Well, all the collectivists since that time have followed the corporate pattern. So you're going to see that, and this is what you see on the Obama administration. He works very closely with major corporations, financial corporations, and international banking houses. They're part of this corporate elitist structure. And it's so ironic to me, every time you see on TV, they discuss him as if he's a people person, as if he's for the little people and the disenfranchised people. But he's always in the company of some of the most wealthy, powerful people in the world. His wife dresses in dresses that cost fortunes. She's a model for all the magazines. They attend very expensive parties and go to the opera, and they don't do things that is this image he tries to project. So he is part and parcel to this. And you also have to realize Bilderberger, Trilateral, Council on Foreign Relations, the organizations that have been shown to actually make policy for our country, particularly foreign policy, but also domestic policy, is made up of all the major corporations. You don't see many governmental organizations in these groups. They're mostly corporations. Your tax-free foundation, which funds most of the advance in this fundamental change we're talking about. They're the financiers of it. They have more money than hundreds of countries have combined. And what they do is they're all corporations. All of these tax-free foundations are corporate. So you have this interlocking tax-free foundations which work together and pool their wealth and exchange their board members. And they're the ones who are financing and making up the ruling elite of the Trilateral Commission and Council on Foreign Relations, which make up most of these governments. Well, you look at the Obama administration, he has more trilateralists in his cabinet than any president yet. And Jimmy Carter held the record before that. So we're seeing that the CFR and the Trilateral Commission now have gotten an iron grip on our government, and that's why Congress is irrelevant. They don't even have to pay any attention to it. And you hear Nancy Pelosi publicly say, I don't want to hear any criticism of the government, when she holds press conferences.
Let me just comment that if you read Barry Goldwater's book, With No Apologies, and we do offer that through our ministry on page 280, Barry Goldwater talks about how the goal of David Rockefeller's Trilateral Commission is basically to seize the control of the economic and political structure of the world by first seizing control of the political government of the United States. Those are his words. By first seizing control of the political government of the United States. The book was written in 1979. It's available, page 280. You can get it through our ministry. They have done that. They now control the political government of the United States, and we go to the polls every 4 years to vote for the candidates of their choice. But we can't let the American people understand that the structure and function of our government has changed, and that the subversive element that controls both political parties doesn't believe in the Constitution which they swear to uphold. Their goal and their allegiance is to this globalist dream under a ruling corporate elite. Go right ahead.
Right, and the emphasis there should be on corporate elite, because these ruling organizations of Rockefeller are all corporations. You read the list of members, of the ruling members of the Trilateral Commission, which is public, and you look at the Council on Foreign Relations, it's all the major corporations in America. General Electric, the major newspaper publishers, the major manufacturers, the major financial banking houses in the world. So it's a who's who of the corporate world, and what they've done is they've completed this dream of taking over the government.
And you mentioned General Electric. Well, of course, who is it? Who is President Obama's labor czar? Who did he pick for the head of the labor czar of America? Why, the president of General Electric, who's moving everything to China, who's moving his entire structure of General Electric to China, and yet Obama appointed him the labor czar of the United States. Go right ahead.
And if you go back in the history of General Electric, it was its CEO who designed Franklin Roosevelt's whole program. It was designed by the president of General Electric. If you look during World War II, General Electric was accused of traitorous activity by supporting Hitler and building factories in Germany during the war that helped Hitler's war effort.
Not only that, but they were actually, all during the Second World War, they were headed by Americans living in Germany. And of course, they were managing General Electric, General Motors, Ford, IBM, IT&T, American corporations all during the war, financed Adolf Hitler, provided the weapons for Adolf Hitler, certainly the major American banks, 10 of them, provided the money. This is all covered in a wonderful book we carry called America's Nazi Secret by John Loftus, who worked for the Justice Department, had a security clearance 3 levels above top secret, and only recently has he been able to tell the truth because he had signed a secrecy agreement, which fortunately has expired, and the people from the Justice Department called him and pleaded with him to write a book to tell the truth, which he did, and we carry that book, America's Nazi Secret, and going into the background of how GE and, of course, the other major corporations provided the weapons not only before World War II, but during World War II, the weapons that killed the American boys at Normandy and the Battle of the Bulge. But we can't let the American people know that, can we? Go right ahead, Russell.
And you look at the history after that, the same thing was seen in Korean War, and particularly in Vietnam. It's been disclosed that major corporations were funding enormous amounts to our enemy that was killing our soldiers. And Americans should be outraged that during World War II in Korea and Vietnam and the Iraq and Afghanistan war, our major corporations are funding the destruction of our soldiers, the killing and maiming of our soldiers. We should be outraged. But instead, they're in our government making foreign policy. And this is why we have something like 20 F-16s being sent to Syria, and
being sent to Egypt.
Egypt, yeah, and all these tanks. You have tanks and personnel carriers and high-tech weapons, And the whole thing about Benghazi was the fact that high-tech weapons were missing in Libya, and the Navy SEALs were there at the CIA headquarters, supposedly tracking them down, trying to find them. Well, it also included surface-to-air missiles, and this is why the whole operation was carried out in Benghazi, in my estimation, was to cover that up. So, and ironically, and I saw a videotape of it. It shows the Muslim Brotherhood shooting down a government helicopter with a surface-to-air missile, and the commentator on there says, "Where did they get that?" Well, they got that from Libya. This was the weapons they secretly were shipping in that these Navy SEALs that were killed were trying to track. So we're going to see a lot more foreign wars. We're going to see them prolonged. We're going to see greater American and international involvement in these wars. They're going to start popping up all over the world, involving numerous countries. We're going to start seeing them occurring in Latin America, in Asia. America is going to be overwhelmed with the number of wars that will be occurring. And, of course...
But I think, basically, people should be asking, why is America sending, I think it's something like 20 F-16s to Egypt when it's under the control of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood who hates America? Why would America be sending those? Well, they said, they were ordered previously. Well, you can cancel an order anytime you want to. But we are creating the best enemy money could buy, and until people understand that, all during the Second World War, we were financing and building the weapons for, at least our corporations were building the weapons for the Nazis, the best enemy money could buy. Once you understand that, things begin to make sense. Go right ahead.
One of the other interesting things is no one has publicly told who the Muslim Brotherhood is, where they came from. The Muslim Brotherhood was formed by al-Husseini in 1930 by Adolf Hitler. He was an admirer of Hitler. At the time, the Jews and the Arabs were getting along just fine. The Palestinians in the Middle East, they had no problem. Al-Husseini hated him, and he traveled to Germany, met with Hitler, visited the concentration and camps and the extermination camp, was taken on a tour, and Hitler told him that when he finally won the war, he was going to let al-Husseini run the Middle East Third Reich. And so he traveled back to the Middle East, set up a terrorist organization called the Muslim Brotherhood, and Eichmann even traveled to Palestine to meet with him and help him organize it. And so he eventually formed an assassination squad, and the first of the suicide bombers was killing the leaders in the Arab countries and in Palestine that were trying to bring peace and resisting them. And so he spread this violent revolutionary Islamic groups throughout the region under the Muslim Brotherhood back in 1948. And eventually, in time, in the 60s, he merged with the communists who were in the Middle East trying to set up a surrogate war with the United States. There's also disclosed in this book on the history of it by Chuck Morris, was that, in fact, many of the Germans after World War II, when they lost the war, was secretly spirited to the Middle East. They changed their names to Arabic names, married the Arabic and Palestinian women, and became the terrorists of the Middle East. Well, we have a generation or two after that now who are making up these terrorists that we think are indigenous, but actually many of them are descendants of these National Socialist Nazis who moved to the Middle East, who were working for Hitler, and had created this Muslim Brotherhood. Well, for some reason, as well documented as this history is, I have not heard a soul anywhere publicly mention the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood is National Socialist, that is Nazi in origin. And yet this government is supporting them.
Well, a lot of strange things are going on. Our guest, of course, is Dr. Russell Blaylock. And ladies and gentlemen, reality is usually scoffed at, and illusion is usually king. You must understand what's going on today. You must understand there are people at the highest levels of our government who are creating enemies. Why would you want to finance, help create, and then certainly finance the Muslim Brotherhood? Well, very simply, you have to have an enemy if you're going to have a war. You have to have a war so you can rally the people behind the all-powerful government, and people then give up their freedom because the government's going to protect us from the bad guys, whoever they are, the terrorists, Al-Qaeda, the Nazis. We need that protection. The communists will be back in a moment. Russell, we've got only 3 minutes to wrap up the program. Fascinating, but anyway, 3 minutes more? Go right ahead.
Well, I went through a list of things that I think we're going to see an acceleration of in the next year or so. If we have the financial collapse that's being predicted, and I think that's a real possibility, we're going to see the anarchy phase, which precedes the actual revolution itself. And I think the revolution is going to be bloody. We may be leading up to World War III. We need, in their minds, a massive war to solidify their power, absolutely. Because during war you can do just about anything you want to. The Constitution is essentially suspended, and so is the Bill of Rights. We're going to see a complete change in the international finances. And so people are going to wake up to a new world, and they're not going to like that world. Now, the people that support these things, they don't know revolutionary history, because in all revolutions, the initiators, the people who do the groundwork, are all killed after the revolution is solidified. There's a picture of Lenin with about 8 of the original revolutionaries. Only 2 in that picture survived. All the rest were killed by Lenin. And the only survivor was Stalin. So what we're seeing is these people think they're going to be in power, but they're marked to be eliminated once the revolution solidified, because in revolutionary psychology, you can't keep around people who are a danger. If they betray their country, they'll betray them. So they can't trust them. So people are going to be quite surprised what they see. They need to solidify their Christian and religious beliefs. This is the time not to abandon God and Christ. This is the time to move closer. It's the only protection. Now, I would encourage nullification as one of our final weapons against this move. People need to know about jury nullification, that they have the right to nullify any decision, and states are going to start using nullification, and we should use it as long as we can. If you're in a jury and you end up in a case for the EPA or the IRS, you have the constitutional right to vote any way you want to, and you can vote non-guilty no matter what the evidence shows.
We're out of time, Russell. God bless. Thanks so very much for being with us.
You.
I hope maybe sometime we can get you back and continue the discussion.
All right. God bless you.
Good
Merry
night.
Christmas.
Bye-bye.